Cool. Well, it's really nice to meet you. I've actually I didn't know a ton before Gia reached out, and um, and I'm surprised we haven't met. But I'm really excited to learn more about your background today. So I
Yeah.
typically will sort of spout off like, here's everything about Caroline, but I want to hear from you today. So just so I can learn
Okay.
more. Maybe this. And I know obviously, CIA, and I know that you worked for April for a long time. You want to change beard, which obviously we're going to talk about. It's awesome. But maybe fill in the blanks of how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, of course. Happy to.
Yeah, just anything you'd like to share.
Oh, right now. I'm
Yeah,
so
yeah,
sorry.
yeah. No,
Oh
it's
my
okay.
gosh.
It's
Sorry, I was
okay.
just texting my husband. I'm like, can you please put the dogs outside? Um
How many dogs do you have?
I have two.
What kind of dogs are they?
Um, they're mutts. One's kind of like a boxer pit bull, and another we one of our servers decided she didn't want the dog anymore, so we inherited another dog like 5 years ago. And two dogs was great because we worked all the time. But now that we have a kid and two dogs, it's just like,
Yeah, it's
I don't want them anymore. I'm done.
mad. Every time. I mean, we see my mom like maybe once, twice a year, and I was like, "You want to take the dog, please, please?" I mean, I love
We
it. We
just
have a
did that
we
to
have a
my
bulldog, but
father-in-law.
yeah.
Yeah. We're like,
Um,
just one of them. Just take one. Um, okay, sorry. Yeah. So I originally got into the industry as the Chili's to go girl in the small college town that I'm from. And then
in
I was just
Texas, right?
obsessed. Yeah, in Texas, in College Station. And so Chili's was a very, very busy, number one visited restaurant. And that kind of like just gave me the bug for wanting to be in the industry. I was 16 though, and so I went to college and then after 2 years dropped out just because I wasn't happy. I didn't like know what I was doing. I moved out to Yosemite National Park.
Oh, nice.
Worked in a kitchen out there, and a bunch of people from the Culinary Institute of America were doing their externships there. And basically just like convinced me like, you want to go to college, you want to go to culinary school. So I ended up just driving back to New York with them when their externship was up and had applied and was accepted, and went to culinary school. And then that got me into New York City, just because I was out in New York and I wanted to work for a woman chef, and April was really the top of the game at that time. So I was at the Spotted Pig. Um, I think I became a sous chef within a year or so. I think I was 21, 22. Um, was there for a bit, got really burnt out. Ended up moving to Pennsylvania, where Eckerton Hill Farm is, and there's a
Oh,
tomato
yeah.
farm,
Mm-hmm.
or it is a tomato pepper farm, other stuff, but Tim Stark. Um, and met my husband. Nelson was there, running the farm. He went to NYU with one of my friends, and we ended up farming in Vermont and then moving to Paonia, which is like a very small farming town in Colorado. Lived in a yurt, did the Airbnb or the bed and breakfast thing, farmed, um, got into farming for a bit, then wanted to get back into kitchens, and ended up in Denver because I wanted to learn how to work with wood fire. And there was a great wood fired restaurant here called Acorn. And then after almost 3 years there, I ended up opening my own spot.
So cool. I didn't realize you worked at Eckerton.
I
That's
did,
that's
yeah.
that's so awesome. I mean, we bought. I can't. There must be um, so many thousand tons of tomatoes that we've bought from Eckerton over the years. When I was working for Kuntz, we would get literally like 100 cases to make the tomato concassé. I just remember just
Yes.
hours and hours because their tomatoes are amazing.
They're
Um,
amazing. Yeah, just really beautiful. And that was like kind of in the era. I don't know what it's like anymore, but in the era of like overeducated, college students going to work on farms. And so there
yeah,
was like
I
there
hired
was
some of
like
them.
yeah. So there was, like four or five of us out there that just wanted to unplug and work in the tomato fields all day.
Yeah,
We're
there's
still all good friends, but yeah.
I imagine there must be so much. I mean, every time you go to farm, there's so much you pick up when you see like purslane growing, in the around the corners of of the cabbage or something, and you see like,
Yeah,
things that are growing together, or just like so much inspiration. That had to
totally.
impact like how you cook, right?
No, absolutely. I think the spotted pig was incredible. It was such a machine. But all the produce ended up in the basement, right? Like it goes down the hatch doors, and there's a whole crew down there that preps everything. And then when we got there for service, we just go get it. Like our garlic was peeled, our shallots were cut,
Mm.
because it was just such a beast of a restaurant that we didn't do a ton of prep. So I just got to a point where I was like, I don't even know how this grows. I don't even know what this looks like. And so and April was such a particular person that one summer we didn't use tomatoes because they weren't to her standard, and so I think that was another part of it that I was like, what happens to all this produce that doesn't get used by these top chefs? And they usually buy 500 pounds a week, and now all of a sudden we're not buying any. So, yeah, I feel like that definitely made me want to work on farms to understand the
Yeah.
whole process.
Are there a couple things that you grasp now that you think a lot of people probably don't, that you walked away with, that you
Yeah,
could
I
share?
mean, I think farms are definitely, chefs are like very in tune with farms now, for the most part when they work with them. But I think just understanding what farmers have to put in, it's not like you just text them and then magically you get the 20 pounds or whatever. I think that I have way more patience or just like understanding of like if something doesn't show up or there's a hailstorm or whatever. I think like 10 years ago, I would have been pissed and like, what the fuck? Like, where is this product? And now it's just like, yeah, of course. Totally get it. We'll move on to something else today. And I think that definitely helped me just kind of become. I hate the word pivot now, but it helps you like recognize that you're gonna have to change your game plan. Um,
Yeah.
and I think that that's an important skill for sure.
Yeah, I love that. It's also, I think because it's a lot easier to order product today than it was 10 years ago.
Hmm.
I remember getting faxes from, Blooming Hill Farm of like, here's what we have.
Yeah,
Choose it, don't choose it.
totally.
And that sort of responsiveness to the farm, as opposed to like, proactive, like, here's the things that we want. It's like, no, no, here's what we have. I think it's a different way of cooking that I think it's a little bit more difficult, but it's definitely,
Yeah,
a nicer sort of like connection with the farm.
yeah, for sure. And
So
now it's so funny the faxes.
yeah, I know. Well, I mean, also faxes used to come for the DoorDash orders, and the
Yeah,
Grubhub too. So,
yeah.
um, so I don't know anything about Colorado. I was like, I don't think I've ever even been to Colorado. So I want to talk a little bit about, like, I know you're not from there, which I didn't realize until my assistant sent over some information. I realized Texas. Okay, so maybe she doesn't know a ton, but I'm sure you know more now, 3 years later, than you did, um,
Yeah.
when you first got there. But um, what is the like how is it different from, say, New York, where you're cooking, and then culturally, how's the cuisine different? How did you have to adjust? Is the palate
Yeah.
a little bit different? Is the farming similar? Just anything, anything you can share. I'd love to learn a little bit more about, like, generally the sort of landscape.
Yeah. So my husband's originally from Colorado. And let's see, we moved out here from the East Coast almost 12 years ago.
Oh wow.
So we've definitely, I think like working in farms out here was really important because you come from the East Coast where there's grape season, there's, a berry season, all these things that aren't really a thing out here. So I think like when I first came out here, I was really frustrated. I was like, this sucks. Like there's no produce and the tomatoes are not the same types of tomatoes. But I would say like in the past 10 years, it has changed exponentially. There's like a lot of farmers that have moved out here from other areas of the country and are wanting to grow better tomatoes, even though it doesn't stay 80 degrees at night here and there's no humidity. So I think that the produce has gotten definitely way better. And you're just learning to work with different types of things. You just don't like whenever I go to New York during market season and I go to the Union Square Market, I'm just like, this is not fair, or I go to LA any time of the year and I'm like, are
Yeah,
you fucking kidding me?
yeah.
Um,
What are you working with? I mean,
but
you said you're working with things that you weren't working with before. Like, what are some things, some products that you work with a lot more now because you're in Colorado?
I mean, this sounds so terrible, but like potatoes, like it's silly, but there are so many different varieties, different times of the year, different types of sweetness, different types of starchness. Like I think that you just have to kind of dig into what's available.
Hmm.
But also at the same time, like Annette is not a farm to table restaurant. We try to use what's in season when possible, but it's also so easy to get stuff, from that's the other part, right? Like talking about like how that changes. Like you can get Rincon tropics, you can get passion fruit from a farmer in California, put in a UPS box, shipped out,
Hmm.
he packages it. So I do think like we do work with a lot of other farmers actually across the country, or fishermen, or I think that game has changed so much. So it's not like if you want uh, grapefruit, you're going to get it from Mexico, from Cisco. You
Yeah.
you find the
Yeah.
farmer
Yeah.
online and you pay a premium.
Yeah. It's so interesting that, there is sometimes this sort of notion of like, well, it's just better or you're supposed to only use local, but it's a choice and it doesn't necessarily mean good or bad. There's lots of,
Totally.
and there's so many things that we use that just will never be that. You want to use lemons and limes in New York,
Yeah.
it's not local. You want to, use any Boiron, I'm picking that brand, sorry, but like, fruit puree, it's not local. But they're
Yeah.
delicious and you have to, and they're more consistent and, it doesn't necessarily, use local when you can, but I do think sometimes it gets a little bit more, like beaten up.
It does. And I feel like the places that are truly doing farm to table are busting their ass to do it, right? Like it's hard and it's a whole different game of sourcing and cooking. And I want to make sure those people get that recognition because I think they're far and few between, even though farm to table is used consistently for every restaurant. But I think like in terms of like Colorado cuisine too, it's changed a ton. Whenever I first moved to Denver, there were like three restaurateurs here and had kind of been here since the 80s, 90s, Cowtown, and were kind of bringing this elevated cuisine and kind of had like every block, in Denver. And I would say since the pandemic, it made a lot of those people have to close because it just didn't make sense to have five or six ten
Yeah.
thousand square foot spaces. And so now you're seeing a lot more independent, chefs or front of the house people going out and opening their own spots. So I feel like that has changed the scene a lot. It's way far behind a lot of other cities, but a lot of people are moving here too from other cities and bringing, they're upping their game and it's making us all have to push harder. And so I think that's fun. But
Yeah.
I think like we're far behind, New York or LA or Chicago, but I do think it's like moving pretty rapidly now.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that it's cool that it's happening so much faster now. There's
Yeah,
obviously always going to be that saturation, New York, Chicago, LA, San Francisco. But, 10, 15 years ago, there was not, there was like one restaurant in each, in each state or
totally.
town down that, but that might be sort of thought of that realm. And now there's way more. And it's funny. It's not just, the culinary thing that pushes people back. I'm sure people are moving to Colorado because of just a different quality of life and
Yeah,
having kids and they've been cooking for a while and now, you know, just more opportunity there.
yeah,
Speaking of kids though,
absolutely.
like, first of all, congrats
Thank
on
you.
a newborn. How is it going? Being a
Whew.
mom and owning a restaurant. And, I know for me, it changed so much of how I think about my team and how I lead
Hmm.
and how I think about my time and how I think about prioritizing, everything that I do. But, I'd love to hear a year in how's it going?
Yeah, I mean, it's been like so many different stages, right? Like a year is wild, like to have a baby that can like literally not hold up their head and then a year later they're walking. Like it's every week it's something different. I mean, it's definitely been the hardest thing I've ever done. I honestly thought to myself, I was like, wow, I've opened a restaurant. No big deal. I can have a kid. Like I went through IVF for 2 years, like getting shots in my ass on the line. Like
Oh my
I
gosh.
I got this. Like I can totally do it. But it rocked my world. Like it not having control. That was a really big thing for me because that's part of the restaurant, right? Like for the most part, in control of a lot of situations. Um, and having to relinquish, you know, a lot. That was really hard for me. I mean, in our first 2 years open, I worked every single day on the line. And we closed one day because I got sick. Like, I mean, we've come a long way from that. But I'm a control freak. And so it was really hard. Um, but it also has made me realize that the restaurant's not everything. Like I think it's really easy to be in this industry and be all in, and it just dictates every single facet of your life. And honestly, bringing a kid in has made me realize there's bigger things, there's other things outside of the restaurant. And I think that ultimately makes me a little bit softer at the restaurant, but that's not a bad thing. Like it makes me ask people, how are they? How's your kid? How's your family? Just things that I've just never. I'm like one of those people, you get to work, you put your head down, you do the work, and you go home. And so I do think it's made me just a more rounded person. I think like we have a tendency to not be rounded people in this
Yeah.
industry.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, it's tough, like not sleeping and then having to go in and run a kitchen and nobody gives a shit, right? Like they
No,
don't care if you're
no,
tired.
no,
Like I can't
no.
even put sentences together and,
Well,
you know,
it's also I don't know if anybody that doesn't have a kid wouldn't know this, but it is so much harder for the mom as well because of
yeah,
one, it's not just, the time. We lose a lot of time, right? And
yeah,
a lot of control over our time, but the body, right? There's like you kind of
totally.
give up
Yeah,
like, the control over your body and
yeah,
all the things that come along with that. And it takes a long time to recover from that. And I'm continually amazed. My wife, was like, she's an event designer. She does floral events and things. Like the week before she gave birth, was doing this big event. The week after, I'm like, what is you're crazy? Like,
yeah,
how are you doing this? And it is pretty amazing.
yeah.
What how the sort of um struggle that has to happen to sort of do that and have a business.
Totally. It's just like a whole nother part of your brain. Like literally half of it gets taken away,
Yeah,
to like, as I was breastfeeding, I was pumping, I'd be prepping. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh my God, I got to run to the office and pump really quickly. Like it was just a whirlwind of,
yeah.
and then I had pretty bad postpartum depression as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and got on medication. But that was a whole nother facet of it that not only are you running a business, and trying to like act like you are just like you bounce back, a couple weeks later. And then like, dealing with like pretty heavy depression slash mourning a life that's gone, like
Yeah,
that was all I had known was running restaurants with my husband. And then that whole identity kind of got taken away for a bit. And I feel like it's slowly been coming back a year later, but it looks different. It feels different. It's
how
just
does
it's a wild ride.
how does it make you? uh, Um, how has that impacted the relationship with? I don't know if you work with your husband or if
Hmm.
I think you guys work together, right?
Yeah,
I mean, I know for my wife, there's no way around a little bit of resentment, because there's just
totally.
more on one than the other. How have you handled that? And the other piece of it and that's what I was mentioning about the bodies. Like, yeah, there's this flood of hormones that just comes in. There's nothing
Totally.
you can do
Yeah.
about it. But
Yeah.
how has that how has that been for you?
I mean, I highly recommend couples therapy. That's something that we
Yeah.
started 6 months probably postpartum because both started going back to work. But I just felt, yeah, I felt resentful because it wasn't like he just got to go back to work,
Mm,
and he got to, be on the floor and talking to guests and doing his thing and loving it, like because he got to get out of the house and into this. And I felt like even though I was doing that, I still like had so many other responsibilities, like
yeah.
pumping or going and feeding her, or, it wasn't like I just got to jump back in. And so I had a lot of resentment and it definitely came to a head where I was like, I hate you. and I don't think I hate you, but I really feel like I hate you right now.
Yeah.
And so therapy was really important. And 3 months postpartum, we opened a bar 2 months ago.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So, so 3 months postpartum, we started planning this bar, and um, it was just a lot. And I just felt, on top of doing the bar and Annette and the baby, it just all exploded. And then my head guy, left right when we opened the bar,
Oof.
in the kitchen. And so it would just like, it felt like everything came crashing down. And so it was really important for us to talk to a third party,
Yeah.
to really kind of sort out how I was feeling and describe it to my husband. And that was really important.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. And even we've had a couples therapists for quite a while. Even when things are going well, it's still important. I think just even if there's some sort of
Totally.
regular cadence for it, because you could just talk things out that way.
Totally.
Um,
And it like we realized that it honestly allowed us to have an hour with just the two of us, which we realized we weren't getting at
yeah.
all. Like
Yes. Yeah. You
when
just
you're at
forced to
work, you're
schedule that
getting
time.
pulled, forced, and like kind of like would drag our feet and be like, oh, we don't have time for this. And then after an hour, we were like, oh, it's so cool to talk to you. Like that was cool.
Yeah. I'm so glad to hear you say that, because it's the same. We start this session and we're like, oh, fuck, I'm tired. I don't know how to do
Yep.
this. And then you're like,
Yeah,
good. I'm glad we actually, got that out of the way, because
totally.
we would never have just scheduled, hey, let's just schedule an hour to talk. Like that. It doesn't
Exactly.
happen, you know?
No, it doesn't. And it is like you don't realize how important it is until you do it. And even how good it is, the next session, we still drag our feet in, we're just like,
Hmm.
I don't want to do
Yeah.
this. And then
Yeah.
you get to end it and being like, hey, I like you. Like you're a cool person.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
is
You just have the
important.
deeper understanding. It's
Yeah.
interesting though. You were saying something before that I think about it a lot too, about you know, the first 2 decades of my career. Everything was work. Just 100 hours a week. I would work on my days off. I'd go stage. I would come in
Hmm.
early and learn how to butcher. And I would always be like, everything was just about that for so long. And then all of a sudden, I didn't have my first kid till I was 38. I started thinking like, oh wow, there's another part of our lives outside of work. And I think, there's like, at first there's this fear of like, okay, got it. Now I'm just not going to be as much into the career because I have something else. But I think it actually makes us better. I think it makes us more better creatives, better leaders, because without that perspective, you don't have like you don't have any sort of vantage other than this sort of like myopic view of what you've been doing your whole life. Then you start
Totally.
having a child and you start having a family, or whatever the thing is, even if it's just like other hobbies or other things that you love, that gets into that impacts your creativity. That impacts. I don't know if you feel the same,
Yeah.
but I
I
think it
think
actually makes us
like,
better.
I think it was like I didn't realize that I had skipped out on so many things like birthdays, weddings, blah, 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 going out on a Friday night or whatever, because of work. And it made me realize that I've always used work as an excuse,
Hmm.
even if I like didn't necessarily need to be at work that night. I'm like, well, I'm going to be here because,
Yeah.
and that was a really hard thing for me because it's made me like, I don't know. I don't want to like make it seem like we're like, lagoon creatures or something, but I feel that way, like learning how to engage with people outside of the restaurant has been a really hard thing for me to like focus and listen about something that's not about food or somebody's not asking me a question. And so I feel like that was part of the postpartum depression where I was just like, I don't fit in outside this world. Like, I don't want to go out on a Friday night. I don't want to go over to somebody's house and pretend that I care about, whatever's happening in the world. And then it's a muscle that you have to use. And I felt like once I started exercising it, I was like, oh, this is cool. Like there's other things going on outside of my restaurant or outside of this sphere of food that I'm constantly comparing myself to this person or wanting
Hmm.
to be better than this person or whatever. And I think like I'm just getting to a point now where I feel not guilty. Um, because like we went to dinner on a Saturday night with some friends and I was like, this is crazy. Like we should be at the restaurant. But then it makes you just open your eyes and you can see things and you can enjoy different experiences. And I think that it comes back to the restaurant too.
Yeah, 100%. I always think about, comics. The only way they continue to be funny is to continue to experience more life. Like if they're
Yeah.
telling the same story over and over again, it's not going to be funny anymore. And I think
Yep.
it's similar with any craft or any art, right? Like
Yeah.
you have to have more new perspectives. Otherwise, nothing really changes,
Exactly. Yeah,
Um,
I totally agree with that.
I still don't
It's
like going out
weird.
on a Friday night, but that's
Yeah.
I'd rather stay home and cook. Um, so so we're long past COVID, but it seemed I heard I was talking about buddy Andrew Freeman the
Hmm.
other day, and I realized he had done an interview with you right around. I think it was right in the heart of when it was all
It
going
was,
down.
yeah. I was like
Uh,
crying.
we're past it, but it was a wake up call for a lot of us of like, oh wow, we have a pretty like fickle business model here, and it one string can break a lot of things. Has Did COVID change the way that you think about how you operate the business, or ways of being more durable as a business?
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely did. God, I feel like there's so many iterations of the restaurant that occurred during COVID. And I think if anything, it's just taught me that I don't know if this business model is sustainable forever. I don't know what the future of yes, it made us resilient. Yes, it made some of my key employees now, people that stuck around and were like, yeah, I'll run food out in the parking lot with you in the snow. And now one of them, we opened a bar for him, and that's like 4 years later. And he did the damn thing with us and earned to have his own spot. But I think it also has made me kind of like really step back and look at the model of our restaurant. And how many people it takes to run and how it's so dependent on firing on all cylinders every single night just to make a profit. And I feel like I'm still kind of like dealing with the backlash of that, if that makes sense, just kind of really looking at what are we doing? What does it take to do it? And does it feel sustainable for the long term? I think like that year of COVID or 2 years of COVID just aged me and the
Yeah,
restaurant,
yeah,
faster and put us through, some really tough stuff that has made me just not sure that this style of restaurant's going to be around forever or if it's like what I want to do. So that's like a very heavy
yeah,
takeaway from it. But it just made us really stop and look and think about what's the future of this style of restaurant.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, the unit economics of a restaurant business just are not great, and the margin of
Mm-mm.
error is really low. It's funny, I was talking to a buddy of mine, this guy Dave Santos. He has a restaurant in New York, an amazing restaurant called Fox Face, by the way. And there was this review. I won't name the writer, but it said they were talking about how it was the prawn dish was too expensive. And I wanted to talk to you about this just because, well, we don't know each other, so let's just talk about something that's industry related.
Yeah.
I have this. I get really annoyed when I hear sort of this thing is too expensive, and because when I think about like what you actually pay for at a restaurant, people I think often are, in their minds are like, wait a second, shrimp costs $8 a pound, so
Hmm.
why am I paying this? And it's like, yeah, how much would a butler and a maid and a cleaner
Hmm.
and a server at your house? How much would all that cost? And how much would it cost for someone to come in and design that room for the day so it feels really nice? Because I
Yeah.
think we pay for so much more than just when you go to a restaurant, you're paying for an experience. The food is a piece of it. Um, I think that if the perception of what food should cost doesn't change, then to your point, it's a tough model to ever like be evergreen unless you start to I mean, there are things you could do, obviously, and of course, top line volume cures most things.
Yep.
But I'm curious how you think about that, and just the perception of what food costs, and how.
Yeah. Well, and I think, going back to how we source it now, the fact that somebody sees a shrimp at the grocery store that's $8 a pound, that's from Indonesia or Mexico, we have a shrimp at our bar that's $26 a pound, and it's because it's domestic. And this guy in Florida goes out every morning and gets, and they're like, oh, why is this so delicious and expensive? And I'm like, well, those two kind of go hand in hand. It's a far superior product than what you can buy at the grocery store, but you are going to pay more for it. And I think also people are getting really price sensitive right now, like it's just prices have just been going up across the board, grocery store, everything, and I think it's easy to take it out on restaurants because there are people there, right? Like that you can say, hey, you're in charge of this cost and I'm not happy about paying this. You go to the grocery store, like it's not like you get to complain to the checkout person. You can, but it doesn't matter. But I think like that in conjunction with we've added a service charge too for the first time. And it's because like the living wage, what it costs to live in Denver, it's extremely high. And we need to pay people a living wage, and that's really, really made people angry. Just like, oh my God, now there's this extra fee. And a lot of people say, I'd rather you just put it into the price of the food. I'm like, no, you don't.
Yeah. No,
Like you're going to be unhappy either way, right?
yeah.
Like yeah, sure. You want me to charge you $50 for a chicken? We could do that. Or, there is this like 5% service fee that we have to use to help pay our employees. So I just feel like it's always going to be a battle, but right now it feels like a way bigger battle than usual. And I think it's just because people are tired of prices going up, and I get it, me too. But that's just, it's the way it is,
Yeah. 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 I think it just requires a lot more storytelling around what,
Mhm.
what's happening to. I mean, think about this, like you you go to a spa without any of the services of a massage or whatever, it's $100. Like
Mhm.
just go there. There's nobody waiting on you. There's like
Mhm.
there's one person that will clean an entire room, but there's there's fixed costs of like heating the water and the lights and things like that. But that's like anywhere. But it's $100 just to experience that thing.
Totally.
And you go to a restaurant, you sit down, and you have three people bringing you food. You have another person that's just professionally trained to talk to you about the beverages that you're gonna have. You have a number of very highly trained folks that are like designing a menu, and more that are like cooking that menu. Um, you have people cleaning the thing. And then there's so much involved, and so maybe part of what needs to happen is more storytelling around all the things that actually go into this, outside of just like sitting down and getting a plate of food that's brought to you.
Yeah. And I think the best experience you can have in a restaurant is the one where you don't notice all that stuff, right?
Hmm.
Like you don't notice all the people bustling around, or when your plate was
Yeah.
cleared and you got reset, like that's the best experience is when it's seamless and it doesn't interfere. And I think people take that for granted too, because they're
Yeah.
just like, they don't see it. They don't see it all. And that's like because we worked really hard for you not to see it. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a lot going on behind the scenes.
Yeah. Yeah. Usually more when you don't notice it as much. Um,
Totally.
so, um, so now you have two places and you have a kid.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's harder to maintain the consistency of your food. I
Yeah.
just imagine it has to
Totally.
be, right?
Yeah.
What are some things that you do or are there things that you've added on to your process to help do that? Or is it just the people involved? Like, how do you maintain consistency now that you're starting to scale?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I finally wrote recipes down. My God, took me
Nice.
6 years to get there. Like that was part of the problem. Everything was in my head.
Hmm.
Um, But, I have always retained people in the kitchen. I said my main guy left. Well, he's like moving into my basement tomorrow, 4 months later, because he's
Oh, that's
ready to
cool.
come back. Um, but we've always tipped out everybody makes the same amount of money in our restaurant. So our kitchen makes the same as our
Oh, well.
servers, as our dishwashers, as our host. So we have been fortunate to retain a lot of people in the kitchen. So the person who is like really in charge right now, she's been with me for 4 years. And so I think the main thing is I it's open communication. I think sometimes people are afraid to ask questions or don't want to reach out to the chef because they should know how to do something, whatever. I have the exact opposite philosophy. I'm like, reach out, call me,
Yeah.
whatever. If you have any questions, I think that's been a really big part. And, so I get a lot more phone calls or when I go in, I just taste every single thing that's in the walk-in. It's a small walk-in and it's easy to do that. So I think it's just like trying to use that time a bit more often. Like it's everything is very condensed now. So it's like you walk in, you're like, all right, I'm gonna taste this, this, and this. Everything's good. We also have an insane regular base, people that come to the restaurant every single week. And
Hmm.
I have good relationships with them. And I love it when they're like, hey, this tastes a little bit different this time. And I'm like, heard. Yeah, let me go in there. Let me try. Let me see how they're picking it up. And that's been huge. Or my management, my front of the house managers eat a meal every night and they let me know if things taste a little bit different or need to be tweaked. And I think just like having that communication with your staff, I think sometimes some chefs have a tendency to not want to hear negative feedback.
Hmm.
Because it sucks and it's so personal. But I think like really encouraging your staff to give you that type of feedback is really important.
Yeah. Yeah. 100% agree. Are there, just in terms of like, uh, whether it's creating a new dish or hearing that feedback on your current menu, are there frameworks or things that you do to synthesize all the feedback that you get, or is it more ad hoc, just as it comes in?
I think it's usually more ad hoc. We do manager meetings once a week, and a really big important part of those, since I haven't been on the line every single night, is sitting down and talking through the dishes. And I have I have my front of house managers who love telling me every little detail of like who plates what and how. And, I think some people could find that annoying, but I appreciate it. And I also make sure to be there for the first hour of service every night. So I can see all the first of every dishes going out, taste everything. And then we have everybody preps everything for their station. I have a lot of sauces, honestly, and I've learned like with the bar as well. The bar is like very tiny, but has a really beautiful food menu. If you season the sauces just right, it doesn't need a lot of tweaking throughout service, and that's been a really big important thing to me because I feel like a lot of times I go to restaurants and you see cooks not tasting everything. That is insane to me. So
Mm.
it's a lot of tasting, and then whoever's the stew for that night, um, has to taste every single dish that goes out. And it's like when people come and work for me for the first time, and I'm like, "Hey, did somebody taste that?" They're like, "Well, I've made it 10 times." So, and I'm like, "No, no, no." Like
Yeah.
every single time it gets tasted. And I think that is kind of an old school thing that people aren't quite used to, like this younger generation. But how
That's
many
insane.
restaurants have
I
you?
didn't I
Yeah,
didn't know that. But yeah, like how could you
it
not taste
is.
everything?
It's yeah, and it's interesting when they come from kitchens that, I respect, and I'm like, the chef didn't taste everything, and they're like, no, like once you got it, you got it. And I'm like, that's not a thing. But I feel like you can go to restaurants and you can tell what kitchens taste their food and which ones don't.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, but just things change even throughout service. If you have a sauce
Totally.
starts to sit and you have
Yeah.
to refresh it, it's probably getting the viscosity is changing. Um,
Totally. And just working with different products, right? Like in season versus out of season or
hmm.
whatever. Like that's a big thing like with tomato season. It's like, well, sometimes the tomatoes are more acidic, some days they're more sweet. You have to adjust based on that. So
Yeah.
I think it's just a lot of training palates and training them to be mine, right? Because everybody has a different palate. So it takes a long time
Yeah.
to that was something April taught me, and probably a lot of chefs in New York. Like this is what I want it to taste like. And you will eventually get that. It'll
Yeah.
take a minute.
Yeah. That's also what's a lot of fun about cooking is that things change. The bricks level of a pear changes. So if you have a
Totally.
mostarda with pear, it probably will be different depending on the year. We were just talking about this yesterday with Michael Mina, who was on the show, and like their whole process of R&D, and they're maniacal about recipes,
Hmm.
but the recipe is just a piece of it.
Totally.
Things
It's
change,
just
and
half of it. Yeah. And I think that is a hard thing for younger cooks to sometimes realize. Like, I'm like, well, what did you do here? And they're like, I followed the recipe. Great. Thank you. there's still something that's off. So it's just,
Yeah.
it's yeah, it's a learning process.
Yeah. Well, I'm a big believer in, a recipe. Um, I'm a huge believer in recipes. Obviously, it's my company now,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of reasons why, for just of the restaurants that I've been at over the years and running the restaurants. But for me, it's incumbent upon us when we create recipes. It's not just a list of ingredients. It's not just a list of ingredients with quantities. It's not just a list of ingredients with quantities and like the steps to do the thing. But it's also like nothing is implicit. It should be explicit. Like do this, but taste the pear. If it's,
Yep.
if the sweetness isn't this, then you need to adjust. And because there's, you have to have a base of a recipe. You want to know there's 20 grams of this, 40 grams of this, because otherwise it's just chaos. But then
Yep.
you have to explain, hey, you know what? Like russet potatoes, once they hit September, they're going to change a bit. So,
Totally.
and I think that's part of the recipe. And I think we often think that that's just, especially now as there's more folks that are coming in that are green and might not be there forever. Like the more explicit you can be, the better,
Yeah.
because it would take them 15 years to learn everything that's in your brain of how you want that thing. But the more explicit you can be, you know,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's huge. I think like I used to be a very silent, I didn't like talk a lot in the kitchen and just wanted to work. And I think that that's another thing that's come with motherhood is um, talking through everything to until I'm blue in the face of like, this is how much time I have here. So I'm going to try to tell you everything that I possibly can about this dish or why we do it this way. And I think that the younger green crew, it's like split in the middle. There's half of them that are like writing it down, super into it, and then the other half that I'm like, did you hear anything I just said?
yeah, yeah. It's I don't know if you feel this way. I like, and I don't know if it's just an out of the ordinary expectation. But as a leader, I'm like, if I come and show you something and tell you something, I expect that, like I've told you once, I'm not going to have to tell you again because somehow
Hmm.
you've documented it. You wrote it down,
Hmm.
took a note. Maybe you have a really good memory. You're going to write it down later, but like it's the time here is the time, and
Hmm.
I'm showing this to you now so that you can understand it. And if you don't understand it, you'll continue to ask.
Yeah.
Um, I'm curious, and I don't know if necessarily I'm going to ask this like in terms of the difference between now, rel- and the difference between now and when before you had your kid. But how do you approach when a cook makes a mistake with the food that you're making?
Yeah. I mean, I think, when we were in the opening of Annette, the first 3 years, um, I was an asshole. I felt, I was burnt out. I was worked to the bone, and you're seeing every single dollar sign, um, and I was harsh. Like it was harsh feedback, and just getting pretty pissed, and not like throwing things or anything, but visibly pretty upset. And I feel like now, you know, things are not, it's not like little chicken the sky is falling for me now. And I think that a lot of that does come from having a child and realizing that if somebody messes up something, my main thing is don't lie and don't serve something that you are not proud of. And that's really when I get upset. I feel like I am way more approachable now, so when people do have an issue or something doesn't isn't right, they're not scared to come to me. I think that in the first beginning years, I realized that people were starting to not want to come to me to find a solution or to say like, "Hey, this got messed up," and we're trying to sneak it past me. And now that I feel way more approachable, um, my whole thing is like I really don't get mad until you lie. And um that's a really big thing to me. Don't lie, don't try to sneak anything past me. And if you're not proud of what you just cooked, do not serve it. And I think that's like way more of my approach to management now versus what it used to be of just kind of like people being scared,
Yeah.
and being scared to me meant that they were going to do their best. And
Hmm.
that's not how
Yeah.
that works at all.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting because it's how it existed for so long.
Hmm.
And, a pattern that I'm seeing now, I started this podcast a couple years ago just for fun. The first one was with Wiley, and that's why we started doing more of them. And the same thing that he and I were talking about, I've seen as a pattern in so many kitchens where there's very clearly this, creative, innovative, thing happening, that the common thread is creating this culture of um, kindness and a lack of fear. Because what's
Hmm.
funny is, when you're in the weeds, oftentimes you're more scared that the chef is going to be upset with you than the fear that the customer is not going to be happy.
Yep.
So you start putting things up because you're like, oh, I don't want to tell the chef about this because they're going to be upset.
Hmm.
Um, so I just sort of rush it out. But if that fear's gone, if you're like, there's an openness here, and it's
Yeah.
okay to be, it's okay for this to not be to be good. But I need to, if I have this sort of forum, this environment where I can actually like say it to the chef, and they're not going to be upset with me, that
Yeah.
actually unlocks so much more for the ability for the team to actually execute well, because you remove that fear of of like the chef just being upset with you, and
Totally.
ultimately it's our fault anyways, right? If they're not executing our food well,
Yeah.
it's on us,
Everything
not
falls on us. Yeah. Totally. And I think like that in itself is like a hard evolution to go through because there were moments where I felt like, am I getting really soft? And now nobody, everybody feels comfortable and,
yeah,
um, and then I'm like, well, what kind of kitchen am I creating now? And then, then you have a really hard service and you maybe not like get mad, but kind of like come down a little bit and see everybody really tighten up. Or I think then it's like one of those moments, like it's like, no, this is good. Like this, they feel comfortable in their environment, but when push comes to shove, they do care and you do see a side of that. But it is I think I had a lot of issues of like, oh my God, am I soft? And now I have this like easy kitchen. And it's like, okay, well, what's wrong with an easy kitchen? Is it easy? Like it's
yeah,
this crazy mind.
it is, yeah. And the fear then just sort of gets shifted to you, and it doesn't
Mhm,
ever really go away. But yeah, you're
mm-mm,
like, then you're like, fuck, am I like, am I giving up control and now things are all going to go to shit, or am I giving up
totally.
control and actually people are going to surprise me
Yep.
and start executing even better? And it's just so scary because you don't know, and it's not like one day you're like, oh yeah, now it works, so we're cool.
No,
It's like this
no,
constant,
it's constant. And it is such a seesaw because you will get people who'll take advantage of you and, be like, oh, this is a like super chill kitchen. I'm gonna watch football on my phone or whatever, like there's different types of people. But I think ultimately a lot of us are learning that working in fear is not, it
yeah,
doesn't create the best product.
yeah. And I mean, I could just hear from talking to you, like how much it seems like you've evolved, like that striking that balance between a level of understanding and a
Yeah.
level of healthy pressure is
Yeah.
it's just really, really hard,
It's a
because you
hard
have to have
balance.
both.
And I had my sous chef Chelsea, she opened the restaurant with me and we ran a 2-woman line for the first like 3 months and also were the dishwashers. And so we were just like in it together. And she took a lot of the brunt of like my, lashing out or getting mad about certain things. And she's now opened her own sausage company. And she came to do a pop-up with a bar a couple weeks ago. And she was in the kitchen and something happened and she kind of looked at me to see, how I was going to react. And, I went and got the mop and was like, all right, cool. Like, let's run back to the walk-in, grab this. And she looked at them and she was just like, are you kidding me? Like, this is what you're like in the kitchen now. I'm like, yes, yes.
He's like, why didn't I get this?
Yeah,
Um,
I know. Yeah.
well, speaking
But
of women in the kitchen, from afar, from what I've seen, it looks like you're obviously a huge supporter of women. You try your best to hire as many women as possible. One
yeah,
thing I read a couple times, which I wanted to double click on, which you said that you also appreciate that like women have a slightly different palate, or maybe just a palate that is more of your preference.
yeah.
Could
Yeah,
you?
I think maybe
What
that's
does
a
that
really
mean?
nice way to put it because I think like sometimes I feel like I'm digging myself in a hole and I'm not trying to say that like women are better or it's just different. And I think that they pick up on my palate faster, and it doesn't take quite as much coaching because again, like it's so funny, right? That we like put out food and it's so personal. Just because somebody may not like the way that, I season something. I love it. They don't, like I always think about that when we're serving food. I'm like, this is crazy that I'm literally just putting things on a plate that I like and I'm hoping that other people like. But I do think for the most part, I do think that women pick up on my palate faster. And sometimes it's like, maybe more like subtle, um, like changes in a certain dish, that I feel like, just sometimes feels like it has a woman's touch. I don't know, how to describe that. But then in the same breath, my right hand person, Jake, um, he ran my kitchen for the first time ever whenever I gave birth. And, I think did almost a better job than me with certain dishes and certain, flavor profiles. So I think it does come down to the person, but I have appreciated working with women in the kitchen a lot.
Yeah. Are you well, I'm gonna ask this differently. What do you think is still the biggest obstacle for, I mean, 'cause there's a lot of them, obviously, but for women in the hospitality industry? Maybe in just industry in general, but we could stick to hospitality if it's easier.
Yeah, honestly, this has been a really weird thing since the pandemic. Ever since the pandemic, I used to have women apply in droves for Annette, like I got way more women applicants for the kitchen than men. And ever since COVID, I get maybe one woman for every 10 to 15 guys that apply.
Mm,
And I don't know what's up with that. I don't know if maybe the pandemic made people realize like, oh, I want to start a life. And in order to start a life outside, I can't work in the kitchen. I think like I've had a few women chef reach out to me, who are kind of on the fence of like, can I have a kid? How do I have a kid? How do you do this? And I think that that's one of the biggest things. In order to start a family, this industry is just not conducive to it. Like, I don't know how I would have had a kid without owning my own spot. And I think that a lot of people do it. But I think for me personally, I just didn't know, like we're all trying to climb up the chain, right? And then as soon as you have to be taken out to give birth, and then you kind of lose your place
yeah.
and people
Yeah.
think differently of you and you have different priorities, you are overlooked. And so um, I think that that makes it really hard for women. If you have any inclination that you want to start a family, I think it's easy to be like, this is not the industry for me. This isn't going to work. And that sucks. And I also don't know how to make it. Um, I don't have any cooks that have kids. Um, and I think that a lot of my cooks don't want to have kids. And maybe that's why they chose this profession. But I think that it's really, really hard to start a family. And when you are the person not usually carrying the child and giving birth to the child, it just doesn't,
Yeah.
it's a difficult profession to be in.
It really is. Like a dumb question to ask, like, hey, what's the solve for this? Because like
Yeah.
restaurants, you start working in the morning and service just around 5 and then going till like nighttime. So who's putting the kids to bed? Who's picking up from school? Who's
Yeah.
when it's early days, like who's there just all the time? It just doesn't. It's
Yeah.
a tough one because it's like what are we supposed to say? Like, oh yeah, parenting and being in the restaurant business don't align. Like it kind of sucks.
Yeah, it does suck. And I think also it's such a physical job, right? Like that aspect's never going to go away with restaurants. We can change so many things, right? We can make the pay better. We can make the conditions better. But at the end of the day, it's a physical job. And there's just no way around that. And when I was at the Spotted Pig, I worked with two pregnant women, and one of them was a sous chef. And I remember she was like a week away from giving birth, and we were upstairs, and she had just worked a 12-hour day. Everything was swollen on her body, just,
Yeah,
and she was sitting and just crying so hard. And I'm like, what's wrong? And she was like, I'm weak now. I'm
yeah,
weak. Like, you guys have to help me carry things up 3 flights of stairs. And I was just like, what? Like, you're not weak at all. You're the strongest person. But I understand too now being in that same position where I'm like, can you guys lift this for me? Because like I'll
yeah,
go into labor if I lift it. It's the toll that it takes on our bodies in conjunction with working in the conditions, whether they're great or not great, it doesn't align.
yeah. Yeah, the only real solve is that there's redundancy of people, But that's too expensive.
That's the thing, right? Like, yes, like get a staff that can do it for you. Absolutely, but that costs money. And that's been the biggest thing is like our labor COGS used to be 37%. And now that I'm not as involved, we're hovering at like 49%. And it's like, okay, whoa,
Your
this
total
like this
prime
is
cost,
crazy
labor and
of
cost.
just labor.
Oh wow.
Just labor is like
Jeez.
covering at 49% with my husband and I not working 80 hours a week. Now we work 60 hours a week and we pay for 40 hours of, a nanny. Like our costs have gone up exponentially and then at both places for
Yeah.
our personal
I
life
mean,
and for professional.
just for for I mean, I think there's only really chefs and restaurant folks listening to this, but just if there are diners, putting that in perspective, you sit down, you have a $40 entree. That means $20 went towards the labor of that entree, and then another like at least whatever like 20%, the 25 probably 30% went to the food,
Yeah. Yeah.
so you're talking about another $12. So like now that's $32, and you got 10% going towards rent. So now you're like $36. Then you have OpEx of utilities and things like that. So that $40 dish that seemed so expensive, you're making like $1 on it if you're lucky, you
Totally.
know?
If you're lucky. Yeah. I mean, I think that has honestly like kind of why we've been thinking about different business models just because we're like, oh my God, we didn't realize us putting in 80 hours a week was what was making our COGS, our labor costs,
Yeah.
sustainable-ish, not for us like as people, but for the restaurant.
Yeah.
So that's been like a really interesting thing for us to kind of see stepping away in the capacity that we have, which is still working at least 50, 60 hours a week is hurt the bottom line for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Because the only real solve there is that $40 dish actually costs 70.
That's right.
um,
That's exactly right.
all right. So moving on. And we got a couple more things we can talk about, and we'll wrap up here. I'm sure you're busy. I've been asking this a lot lately. Um, what makes you really, really angry? Like, what makes your blood boil? Like,
Oh, I'm trying to think of something that happened yesterday because I remember coming home and just being like, um, you know, I think it's people not when they're at work, not being at work 100%, honestly, because I feel like we have 4-day work weeks for all of our employees, 4 10s, and they have 3 days off. And for me, it's almost like a respect thing. When you're here, I need you to be here. And when you're not here, you're not here. I don't contact you on your day off. I don't ask anything of you on your day off. And so I ask for the same respect back. And honestly, I think it's happened since having a kid too, because realizing like how important it is for me to be at the restaurant and be there 100% as best I can. I want people to do the same to me. And maybe that's like old school. Maybe that makes me like a restaurant boomer. I don't know. But I think that with cell phones and people having like, social media and all that kind of stuff, like it's really easy to like go to the bathroom and check your phone or be walking to the walk-in and you're scrolling and like that shit just drives me nuts.
yeah,
And I think that is like an old, like something that maybe isn't something that people care about as much anymore, but I really do care about that a lot. And it really does chap my ass if you get to work and decide to scroll on Instagram on the line if we're slow.
yeah, that would drive me nuts too. It's funny. Um, Chef Boulay passed this week.
Yeah.
David Boulay. I worked for him a couple decades ago, and I remember right after we lost the fourth star, he gave this speech, and it doesn't really necessarily relate to cooks, although maybe nowadays it would, but obviously a lot of the front of house. And basically what he said was, look, a lot of you are here because you want to be musicians or artists, or you're going to law school, or you're going to, whatever the thing is that you're doing now, maybe you want to be an influencer, whatever the thing is.
Hmm.
And you might not want to be here because you want to be a 3-star Michelin chef or something like that. But if you can give 100% here doing this, just imagine what you can do with the thing that you actually love to do. And it's funny how that has stuck with me like 20 years later. I still tell
Hmm.
my staff about it. Um, because yeah, this is, you know, what you do and the amount of like time and energy and thought and work that goes into what you're building. It really only works if everybody also aligns there
Hmm.
and also gives that because yeah, one clearly it's just it's not doesn't feel fair, right? Like you're you know like hey, while you're here, especially I'm giving you a 4-day work week, like
Yeah.
let's give it our all. Um,
Yeah. And I think like, being working in New York and working for top chefs, I'm sure you heard from them on your days off or, maybe before your shift or whatever. And I feel like that's a really important thing to me to not do. And if I do reach out to somebody on their day off, then it's like, it's pretty urgent. It's not just me, just making them do something that they don't want to do or whatever. But I think that I think recognizing that if I give that respect, I want that respect back as well.
yeah, yeah. Well, when you're not at the restaurant and you're not
Mhm.
being a mom and a wife and a dog owner, is there anything else you're doing for fun outside of all of that?
You know, I mean, yes and no. I think I'm at this point where I really want to find something that excites me outside of motherhood and work, because it feels like the two can feel like a slog if you don't have something else. I've always loved exercising. That's a really important thing to me, running, yoga, Pilates, but I'm starting to realize that like I need to find something else. And I live in Colorado and I don't hike and I don't get out. And that's like part of the reason a lot of people live here. But besides gardening, no. I feel like
Do you
I
garden?
have,
Do you have a garden at
I
all?
do. Yeah, yeah. And last year was the first time I didn't garden. And that is when I got on Zoloft because I realized like, I'm not like if this thing that used to bring me joy is like absolute like I can't even think about it, something's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a really important thing because my husband was like, "Whoa, like you're not gardening. What's going on?" And I was like,
Yeah.
"I don't know. I hate life. I hate everything." He's like, "Okay, let's get on some
Oh
medication."
man.
But I think like I do find things like that really enjoyable. But I sent my husband a text yesterday. Our walk-in is outside. It is ridiculous how we have to go get food. But I was walking out to the walk-in and the sun was setting and I took a deep breath and I was like, oh my God, I haven't even like stepped outside and like took a deep breath and feel, the sun and just had this moment. I sent my husband a text and I was like, I kind of feel like life's passing us by, like it's just from one thing to the next, and we're not like stopping. And that was like a really big moment for me to just be like, I need to figure out some other things that bring me joy. The restaurant brings me immense joy, but it's a different type of joy. So, long answer, I need to find something.
What are you doing today to try and make that happen?
I woke up, I was like, I'm gonna go for a run. And then I convinced myself I'm not gonna go for a run. And now I'm like, I'm gonna go for a run because I need to be outside, I need at least 45 minutes to to just appreciate
Yeah.
being alive, honestly. Sometimes you kind of take things for granted. And I think that a lot of us do that in this industry. So I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna get out
Yeah.
and run.
I love running for that, by the way. I like running for me isn't even exercise. It's just like this therapeutic. I just my time
Totally.
to think. I don't have anybody
Yep.
else there. I don't listen to podcasts. I don't listen to music. I just run and think. I try not
Yep.
to even go on trails too much because I'll get too distracted by is that a mushroom over there? Is that a ramp? Um, and so like just roads. But it is a great just respite from life. But sounds like you're looking for something else as well. Maybe you can put in like a 10
Yeah.
minute thing in your calendar of just like, okay, I'm gonna figure out one
Totally. Yeah,
new
because
thing
I
to
think
do.
exercise or running has always been my thing and I love that. But now I'm getting to the point where I'm like I want to do something that like I have to learn or something that excites me or keeps my hands busy because I at the end of the night like sometimes I'll just watch shitty TV and scroll through my phone and then like 30 minutes later, an hour later I'm like what the hell did I just do with that free time? Like that sucks. So yeah, I don't know. I just feel like I'm at a place where I'm like, I just want to learn. I want to learn how to do something.
All
I'm
right.
bored. I
Well,
don't know.
if you figure out what it is, send me a note. I want to know. I don't
I
know. I want
will.
to know what you figure out. Um, all right, Caroline. Well, is there anything I didn't ask you that we think we should talk about, or you want to share?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think we like covered a lot.
Yeah, this was good. A little therapeutic. Little, good.
Yeah.
Well, it was a pleasure. Really great meeting you, and
Yeah.
excited to see how you continue to grow all the things that you're building. And
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. And, I think that it's so important to talk motherhood and how you do this. And I think like the more people talk about it, the more maybe empowered women will feel to start families and continue to work in the hospitality industry, you know?
yeah, yeah, and just reflecting on some of the conversation, sometimes there isn't a solution, but to your point, it's just good to talk about it because
Yeah.
it can just help people hear that, oh yeah, I'm not the only one thinking about this.
Totally. I think that that's exactly it because I don't think there's a solution, but I do think like if it's something that people feel like they can talk about or understand more, before they get into it, it makes it feel less scary or daunting.
Yeah, yeah.